Welcome. Tonight's stories come from quiet streets, old neighborhoods, and houses that seemed like perfect rentals at first. But sometimes, when you move into a new place, you're not the only one living there. These are rental house horror stories, true, whispered from those who stayed long enough to realize, some walls remember too much. So, find your most comfortable spot. Let the sound of my voice carry you into the night. And listen closely. Because each of these homes still holds its story waiting for you to hear it. Our first story begins with a woman searching for peace, a quiet rental far from the noise of the city. She found it at the end of a lonely road, a home that seemed frozen in time. But the silence she wanted so badly soon turned into something else, something alive, something that listened back. This is the house on Whisper Lane. Story 1: The House on Whisper Lane. I've rented a lot of houses over the years, but there's one place that still comes to mind whenever someone mentions rental house horror stories. True. It wasn't haunted in the way movies show it, no blood dripping from walls or furniture floating midair. It was quieter than that. More patient. More real. It started 3 summers ago, when I was relocating for work to a small town called Willow Creek. I'd found the rental online, an old 2-bedroom house on Whisper Lane, tucked behind a cluster of pine trees and a winding gravel driveway. The photos showed a cozy place, rustic but well kept, with a large porch and a small pond nearby. The rent was cheap. Too cheap. But I was desperate to move quickly, and the landlord, a woman named Mrs. Dalka, said she preferred quiet tenants. The last few didn't stay long, she said during our first call, her voice oddly detached. But I think you'll like it here. You seem calm. I didn't think much of that line then. I should have. The first night. I moved in on a warm Friday evening. The house smelled faintly of cedar and something older, a dry, stale scent, like pages in an untouched attic book. The walls creaked with each step, but it wasn't unpleasant. It was the kind of sound that felt lived in. After unloading boxes, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun slip behind the trees. The quiet was heavy, almost too heavy. No cars. No distant barking dogs. Not even crickets. Just the wind moving lazily through the trees. I remember feeling oddly self-aware, like someone was watching me from the woods. Every so often, I thought I heard faint shuffling or branches snapping, but when I looked, the trees just swayed, indifferent. Later that night, when I went to bed, I heard soft footsteps upstairs. I froze. My room was on the first floor, and the second floor was empty, just a dusty storage area according to the listing. I told myself it was the wood expanding in the heat, an old house breathing and settling. It was an explanation that helped me sleep, at least that night. The locked door. The next morning, I decided to explore the upstairs area. A narrow staircase led to a small landing with 2 doors. One was open, a plain storage room filled with boxes, some labeled with names that weren't mine. The other door was locked. The lock was old, brass-colored, and oddly warm to the touch. I didn't have a key for it, and there was no mention of a locked room in the lease. When I called Mrs. Dalka, she hesitated. "Oh, that one," she said. "It's nothing. Just old things that belonged to the family who owned the house before me. Don't worry about it." I pressed a little, but her tone shifted firm, cold. "Please don't try to open it," she said. "It's best left alone." After the call, I felt a quiet unease settle in my chest. There was something about the way she said "best left alone" that didn't sound like a suggestion. It sounded like a warning. The whispering walls. For the next few days, things were mostly normal. I unpacked, worked remotely, took walks by the pond. But the nights were different. Each night, the same thing happened around 2 or 3 a.m., I'd wake up for no reason. No sound, no nightmare. Just a sudden awareness. And then I'd hear it faint, rhythmic sounds coming from upstairs. Not footsteps this time. It was softer, like someone speaking through fabric, or whispering through the walls. At first, I thought it was the wind. But one night, I got up, climbed the stairs, and pressed my ear to that locked door. I froze. There was whispering. Distinct, but muffled. And though I couldn't make out words, I could tell it wasn't just one voice. It sounded like several overlapping, as if people were talking in a room just on the other side. Then, as if they sensed me there, all the voices stopped at once. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I backed away slowly, trying not to breathe too loud, and went downstairs. I didn't sleep at all that night. The photograph. A few days later, I was organizing one of the boxes in the storage room, the one that wasn't locked. Inside, under old linens and cracked picture frames, I found a small black and white photograph. It showed a family of 4 standing on the porch, a man, a woman, and 2 young girls. They were dressed in clothes that looked from the 1940s. None of them were smiling. The man's eyes, especially, felt wrong, almost hollow. On the back of the photograph, written in faded pencil, were the words: Whisper Lane, 1947. The last summer. That night, the whispers came again. Louder this time. Closer. I decided to record them on my phone. I left it running near the base of the stairs while I pretended to sleep. When I checked the recording in the morning, my blood ran cold. For the first few minutes, it was just the creaking of the house. Then, faintly, the voices began, layered and distant. But then, clear as day, a woman's voice said something that made my stomach drop. "He's in our room again." I dropped the phone. The whisper wasn't coming from outside the door. It was inside. The shadow by the door. I tried convincing myself it was an old recording or some kind of weird sound illusion from the house's pipes. But deep down, I knew better. That evening, as I worked on my laptop, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A dark figure standing at the top of the stairs, motionless. I looked directly at it, and it vanished. But I swear on everything, I saw the shape of a man, tall, still, and watching. That night, I dragged a chair under the doorknob of my bedroom, a childish habit I hadn't done since I was small. The whispering didn't come that night, but I dreamed of the same family from the photo standing in the corner of my room, faces blank, eyes fixed on me. The landlord's secret. The next morning, I decided to confront Mrs. Dalka in person. She lived only a few miles away. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, maybe even nervous. I told her everything, the whispers, the footsteps, the photograph, the recording. For a moment, she just stared at me, then sighed deeply. I told you not to go upstairs, she said quietly. That room isn't supposed to be opened. It's not, empty. I asked what she meant, and after a long pause, she told me the story of the house. Back in the late 1940s, the Eldridge family lived there, the same ones in the photograph. One night, neighbors heard screams but didn't investigate until the next morning. When the sheriff arrived, he found the father dead in the locked upstairs room, a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and the rest of the family gone. Their bodies were never found. The room was sealed afterward. Every tenant who stayed there reported the same things: whispering, footsteps, shadows. None lasted more than a few months. They don't like being disturbed, she said, her eyes unfocused. The house remembers. The door opens. After hearing that, I should have left. Any sane person would have packed up and driven off that night. But I didn't. Something about that locked room pulled at me. I wanted to see it. To know what was behind that door. That night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, I sat at the foot of the stairs staring at the door. The air felt thicker than usual, like the house was holding its breath. Then, slowly, a sound broke the silence: a click. The door, the one that had been locked since I moved in, creaked open on its own. I froze. The air grew icy. My breath fogged in front of me as I stood, every instinct screaming to run. But I took a step forward anyway. The room beyond was dark, untouched. The faint smell of mildew and iron hung in the air. My flashlight beam fell across old furniture: a bed frame, a small dresser, and something that looked like a stain on the wooden floor. In the corner of the room was a mirror, cracked and dusty. As I moved closer, I saw something reflected that made my skin crawl: a faint figure behind me, standing in the doorway. I turned around instantly. Nothing. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, closer this time. I ran. Down the stairs, through the living room, and out the front door into the rain. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. The final night. I stayed in a motel that night, telling myself I'd return in the morning, grab my essentials, and never come back. When I finally mustered the courage to go back, the next day was clear and bright. The house looked peaceful, almost innocent, as if nothing had happened. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything looked the same, except for one thing. The photograph I'd found, the one of the Eldridge family, was lying on the kitchen counter. Only this time, there was something different about it. Someone had added a fifth person to the picture. A man standing behind the family, his face shadowed. But his outline looked exactly like mine. That was the last straw. I grabbed my bags, locked the door, and drove away, leaving the key in the mailbox. When I called Mrs. Dalcott later to tell her I was gone, she didn't sound surprised. "I understand," she said quietly. "They always find someone new." The epilogue. Months passed. I found another place, newer, brighter, without a whisper to its name. But every now and then, when the house gets too quiet at night, I think about that place on Whisper Lane. I still have the recording on my old phone, the one with the whispering. I can't bring myself to delete it. Sometimes, late at night, I play it back. The voices are faint, but there's one part I never noticed before, right near the end, barely audible. A whisper, soft and almost tender, saying my name. Then, another voice, deeper, male, replying, "He'll come back." I've since moved across states, changed numbers, and even changed jobs. But 2 weeks ago, I received a letter in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a photograph, the same one of the Eldridge family, with the same faint pencil writing on the back. Except now, the fifth figure was gone. And beneath the photo, written in that same faded handwriting, was a new line. "See you soon." If that story left you uneasy, the next one might keep you awake a little longer. Because what happens when the house itself seems to be watching you? When every shadow feels familiar, and every sound seems to follow you from room to room. This is The House That Watched Me, a true rental horror story about a home that never stopped staring back. Story 2, The House That Watched Me. When people talk about rental house horror stories, true, they usually mean strange noises, bad landlords, or neighbors who make life miserable. What happened to me last year doesn't fit any of those. It was something else. Something that still makes me question what's real and what isn't. Arrival. It started when I got a temporary job in Northern Oregon. I needed a place to stay for 3 months, just long enough to save some money before moving back home. After a week of searching online, I found a listing that seemed perfect, a small one-story home at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by woods. The photos showed warm light, vintage furniture, and a sign out front that read, "Maple Hollow, available for short-term rental." The owner, an older man named Mr. Harlan, sounded polite on the phone. He said he and his wife had moved to a retirement home recently, and they just wanted someone responsible to occupy the house for a while. The price was surprisingly low for the area. When I asked why, he just said, "It's quiet. Too quiet for most." I didn't think much of that at the time. When I arrived, the house looked even better than the photos. Cozy. Peaceful. The air smelled like pine and rain. Inside, it was furnished in that old-fashioned, comforting way: patterned curtains, floral sofas, and wooden shelves lined with books that looked untouched. But there was something peculiar I noticed right away: mirrors. Every room had one. The living room had a large oval mirror above the fireplace, the hallway had a tall rectangular one, and even the kitchen had a small mirror by the sink. It was as if the whole house was watching itself. The first few nights were quiet. Too quiet. Even though the woods outside were thick, I barely heard crickets or wind. Just silence, a deep, heavy kind that seemed to press against the walls. I worked long hours, came home late, ate, and went straight to bed. The only odd thing was the feeling that the mirrors somehow changed slightly when I looked at them at night. Not in shape or color, but in depth, as if the reflection wasn't perfectly in sync. It's hard to describe, but it felt like the mirror had a heartbeat of its own. One night, while brushing my teeth, I noticed something strange. The mirror in the bathroom didn't show me brushing my teeth. For maybe half a second, it showed me standing still, staring directly at myself, mouth closed, toothbrush in hand. Then, it corrected itself. It was so brief I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. The visitor. About a week later, I got home after dark. Rain poured hard that night, and fog rolled low across the yard. As I walked to the front porch, my headlights caught something, a shape standing by the trees. A man. Still, silent, facing the house. I froze, watching, trying to decide if it was a trick of the light. But when I blinked, he was gone. By the time I unlocked the door, my hands were shaking. I locked every bolt behind me and checked every window. Nothing. But when I passed by the mirror in the hallway, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. In the reflection, behind me, just for an instant I saw a figure standing outside the window, half hidden by the curtain. When I turned around, the window was empty. Rain drummed softly against the glass, and there was no one there. The sound inside. After that night, the house didn't feel the same. The silence had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore, it was expectant, like the house was waiting for me to notice something. One evening, while reading in bed, I heard a sound. It wasn't the usual creaks of old wood or wind. It was rhythmic, like slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the hallway outside my room. The footsteps stopped right by my door. Then came the sound of something brushing gently against the wood, like a fingertip tracing its edge. I held my breath and listened. The house was still again. After what felt like hours, I opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the mirror at the far end had fogged up, as if someone had breathed on it. Across the glass, written with a finger, were 3 words. "You're not alone." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light on, watching the front door until sunrise. Mr. Harlan's story. The next morning, I called Mr. Harlan, my voice shaking. "Has anyone ever broken in?" I asked. There was a long pause before he answered. "No," he said slowly. "No one's broken in. But people have left early." He sounded tired. Worn out. I pressed him for details. Finally, he told me that the house had once belonged to his father, a reclusive man who was obsessed with mirrors. He believed they could capture reflections of memory, that whatever happened inside the house stayed in the mirrors somehow. When his father died, Mr. Harlan had the mirrors removed. But every time he rented the place out, the new tenants would call him complaining that the mirrors were back. No matter how many times he took them down, they reappeared. "You can take them off the walls," he said quietly. "But they don't like that. It's best just to ignore them." I hung up, trying to tell myself he was just senile or joking. But when I looked around that day, I realized something horrifying. There were more mirrors than before. Small, round ones on the end tables. A tall standing one in the corner of my room. I hadn't seen that one yesterday. It was as if the house was replacing them. The reflection moves. That night, I decided to test something. I sat in the living room with all the lights off except for one dim lamp, facing the big oval mirror above the fireplace. I stared at my reflection for what felt like an hour. My eyes blurred, and my reflection seemed to shimmer slightly in the low light. Then, without warning, my reflection blinked a second before I did. My chest tightened. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. My reflection was standing perfectly still, staring directly at me. And then, slowly, it smiled. Not a friendly smile. A knowing one. The kind of smile that said it was no longer copying me, it was studying me. I stumbled backward and turned on every light in the room. When I looked again, the reflection was normal. But from that moment on, I avoided mirrors whenever I could. The Polaroid. A week later, while cleaning the kitchen drawers, I found something wedged behind the silverware, an old Polaroid photo. It showed the same living room I was standing in, same furniture, same fireplace. Only, in the photo, there was someone else sitting in the chair I'd been using. A man, wearing clothes like mine, same posture, same height. But his face wasn't mine. He looked almost identical, but slightly off. His eyes were darker, and his smile was wider. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "The one inside always wants out." I dropped it immediately and backed away. For the rest of that day, I stayed outside, sitting in my car, trying to decide if I should leave everything behind. But fear has a strange way of keeping you still. I told myself I'd just stay until the end of the month. Just a few more days. The mirror cracks. That night was the worst. Rain fell hard again, and thunder rolled through the forest. Around midnight, I woke up to a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was from the window, but then I realized it was coming from the mirror in my room. A gentle, deliberate tapping. As if someone were knocking from the other side. I stared at it, frozen, until the tapping stopped. Then came a faint whisper, low and distorted. "Let me in." The lights flickered, and I saw something move inside the mirror, a shadowy figure pressing its hand against the glass. My reflection vanished completely, replaced by that dark shape staring back at me. I bolted from the room and slammed the door shut. I heard the sound of glass cracking behind it, a single, sharp break that echoed through the house. In the morning, I cautiously opened the door. The mirror had shattered from the inside, tiny cracks spreading outward like veins. But on the floor beneath the broken glass was a single footprint. Bare. Wet. Facing toward me. Leaving Maple Hollow. That was my breaking point. I called Mr. Harlan and told him I was leaving immediately. He didn't argue. Just sighed and said, "It'll find someone new." I packed everything in under an hour. Before leaving, I walked through each room one last time. Every mirror was perfectly intact again, not a single crack anywhere. But something was wrong. In each reflection, I noticed small details that didn't match reality. In the hallway, the light was on in the reflection, even though it was off in real life. In the kitchen, the chair was turned slightly toward me, though it wasn't in front of me. And in the living room mirror, I saw myself standing there, holding my car keys, but I wasn't moving. The reflection smiled again, that same unnatural grin, and lifted a hand to wave goodbye. I ran out of the house and didn't look back. The photograph returns. A few days later, settled in a motel 3 towns away, I tried to forget about the house. But when I unpacked my bag, something fell out that made my blood run cold. It was that same Polaroid photo. The one I had left on the kitchen counter before leaving. Only now, the photo was different. The man in the picture, the one who looked almost like me, wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing. And the background wasn't the living room of the Maple Hollow house. It was my motel room. Epilogue. That was nearly a year ago. I've moved twice since then. I've replaced every mirror in my home with plain walls or curtains. But sometimes, I still catch a glimpse of movement in reflective surfaces: a window, a phone screen, a puddle on the street, and it's never quite right. Once, while washing my hands at a restaurant, I looked up and saw my reflection smiling when I wasn't. Just for a second. And last week, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a small photograph, another Polaroid. It showed me sleeping in my new apartment. The mirror above my bed, one I swear didn't exist, was cracked down the middle. Our final story tonight reminds us that every rental has a past. Sometimes, it's just broken furniture or faint stains in the carpet. But other times, what's left behind is much harder to clean. In this story, a new tenant moves in only to realize the one who lived there before him never really left. This is The Tenant Before Me. Story 3, The Tenant Before Me. People always say you shouldn't go digging into the history of where you live, that some things are better left unknown. I never believed that until I rented the little yellow house on Brookhaven Drive. It looked harmless enough when I first saw it. A single-story home with ivy climbing the porch posts, a small yard, and white curtains that danced gently in the window. The ad said cozy, quiet, fully furnished, available immediately. I had just ended a bad breakup and needed somewhere peaceful to start over. The price was low, the neighborhood safe, and the landlord seemed normal. His name was Mr. Carter, and he spoke with that overly polite tone landlords use when they're hiding how desperate they are to fill a vacancy. When I asked about the previous tenant, he just smiled and said, "She moved out unexpectedly. Happens all the time." But I could tell from his eyes that wasn't the whole truth. Moving in. I moved in on a breezy Saturday morning. Inside, the house felt warm, lived in. There were framed photos on the walls, generic landscapes and flowers, and faint marks where furniture had been moved. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something else beneath it, something metallic. I tried not to dwell on it. That first night, as I unpacked, I found something strange in one of the bedroom drawers, a small silver bracelet with the name Laura engraved on it. I assumed it belonged to the last tenant and made a mental note to give it to Mr. Carter later. Before bed, I lit a candle, put on soft music, and sat by the window watching the street lights flicker outside. Everything was quiet. Peaceful. But around midnight, I woke up to a faint sound, a slow, deliberate tapping coming from the wall behind my bed. Tap, tap, tap. It stopped when I sat up. The house fell silent again. I figured it was the pipes. Old houses do that sometimes. The notes. A few days later, I started noticing little oddities, small, harmless things at first. The kitchen light would be on when I was sure I'd turned it off. The bathroom mirror would have faint streaks shaped like fingerprints, even though I lived alone. Then came the notes. The first one appeared on the kitchen counter one morning. It was written on a torn piece of lined paper in shaky handwriting. Do not sleep in the back room. I laughed it off, thinking it was some leftover prank from the last tenant. But the next day, I found another note, this time inside my refrigerator door. If you hear her tapping, don't answer. That one stopped me cold. I wanted to believe it was a joke. But that night, the tapping came again. Louder this time. And closer. It wasn't just behind the wall anymore. It was right by the window, just 3 feet from my bed. I didn't move. I just stared at the glass, heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. After a few seconds, the tapping stopped, followed by the faintest whisper. A woman's voice. Soft, trembling. Help me. The smell. The next morning, I called Mr. Carter. He sounded uneasy when I mentioned the notes. There shouldn't be anything like that in the house, he said quickly. Probably just something left behind. Don't worry about it. But when I mentioned the tapping, his tone changed. Is it coming from the back room? I told him it was, and there was a long silence on the other end. Finally, he said, keep that door closed. Please. I'll come by tomorrow. After the call, I stood in the hallway, staring at the door to the back room. It was slightly ajar, just a crack. Enough to see darkness inside. And then the smell hit me. It wasn't lavender anymore. It was sharp, metallic, almost like iron and earth. The smell of something that had been hidden too long. The knock. That night, it rained hard. I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every drop of water outside sounded like footsteps. Around 2 a.m., I heard something that froze me in place, a gentle, steady knocking on the door to the back room. Not the window. Not the walls. The door. 3 knocks. Slow. Measured. Then a voice, faint but distinct, whispering my name. I sat there on the couch, staring at that door until sunrise. When Mr. Carter came by the next morning, I practically begged him to explain. He looked pale, almost sickly. After some hesitation, he finally told me what had happened. The last tenant, Laura, had gone missing 6 months earlier. She'd been renting the same house, living alone like me. The neighbors reported hearing screams one night, but by the time police arrived, she was gone. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. The case was never solved. Mr. Carter said he'd tried to sell the house afterward, but no one wanted it. So he just rented it again. To me. I asked why he hadn't told me any of that before. He just said, I didn't want to scare you off. The door opens. That night, I locked the back room door and pushed a dresser in front of it. I wanted nothing to do with that part of the house. But around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of wood scraping against the floor. The dresser. It was moving. Slowly. As if being pushed from the other side. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then came that same whisper again, this time closer, clearer. Please, let me out. My hands trembled as I turned on the bedside lamp. The door to the back room was open just enough to see the dark inside. The smell was unbearable now, wet metal and rot. I don't remember deciding to move, but somehow, I found myself standing in the doorway, staring inside the room. It was empty. No furniture, no boxes. Just a bare floor and four walls. But in the center of the room, faintly visible even in the low light, was a dark circular stain on the wood. And scratched into the floorboards, over and over again, was the name Laura. The photograph. The next morning, I found another note on the kitchen counter. But this time, it wasn't handwritten. It was a photograph. It showed the back room, the same room I'd seen last night, but there was something in the photo that wasn't there before. A woman. Standing in the corner, facing the wall. Her hair long and dark, her skin pale, almost gray. I flipped the photo over with shaking hands. On the back, in faint pencil, was written, "She never left." The visit. I called Mr. Carter again, furious and terrified. But this time, he didn't answer. So I went to his office myself. The small property management sign out front said Carter Realty. Inside, the receptionist looked confused when I asked to see him. "Mr. Carter," she repeated. "He passed away months ago. Heart attack." I stood there, frozen. "But, he rented me the house 2 weeks ago." She frowned. "That's impossible. His son's been trying to sell that property ever since the incident." I left before she could finish. My mind was spinning. If Mr. Carter was dead, who had I been talking to? When I got back to the house, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. The caller ID said unknown. I pressed play. It was his voice. Calm. Slow. Familiar. "You should have left when you had the chance." The final night. That night was the last I spent in that house. The power went out just after midnight. I sat in the dark with my phone flashlight on, every noise amplified by silence. Then, from the hallway, came the sound of wet footsteps, slow, dragging steps moving toward my room. I pointed the light toward the doorway. Something was there. A woman's figure, her hair dripping wet, her clothes torn, her head tilted slightly as she took another slow step forward. Her eyes were sunken, black and hollow. Her skin glistened with moisture, like she'd just crawled out of water. And around her wrist, glinting faintly in the light, was a silver bracelet. Laura. I dropped the phone and bolted out of the room, down the hallway, through the front door, barefoot in the rain. I didn't stop until I reached my car. When I looked back, the front door was wide open. In the faint light from the street lamp, I saw her silhouette standing in the doorway just watching. And then, slowly, she lifted her hand, and waved. Aftermath. I never went back. I left everything behind: clothes, furniture, everything I owned. A week later, I got a call from the police. They had searched the house after neighbors complained of a horrible smell. In the crawl space beneath the back room, they found human remains. Dental records confirmed it was Laura, the tenant before me. The detective said there was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. The case was ruled undetermined. He told me something else too, something that still keeps me up at night. "When we went through your belongings," he said, "we found several photographs you might want back." I told him I hadn't taken any photos. He paused. They're Polaroids. All of you sleeping. Different nights. Different angles. Whoever took them was inside the house. I never asked for the photos. I never wanted to see them. Epilogue. It's been over a year now, and I still can't sleep without a light on. Every so often, I dream of that house, of the smell, the tapping, the woman in the doorway. Last month, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed my new apartment, my bed and me, asleep under the same blanket I use now. But this time, standing in the background, half hidden in shadow, was a woman. Her hair long. Her skin pale. And on her wrist, that same silver bracelet. Laura. You never really know what came before you, the memories in the walls, the whispers in the attic, the rooms that seem colder for no reason. Every rental has its secrets. Some are just stories. And some are still unfolding. If you enjoyed tonight's rental house horror stories true, take a moment before you drift off, make sure the lights are off, the doors are locked. And maybe, just maybe, whisper a thank you to the house you sleep in tonight.